And so this was the first time we've heard anything along the lines of a potential conditioning of U.S. aid and support to Israel. And so that's why this is, at this moment, somewhat of a seminal moment in the war, because it's the first time that we've even heard from the administration that there is a potential for a policy shift. And now there's no guarantee that this will change, President Biden's policy will change, and now it's on Israel to meet President Biden's demands.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by defense reporter Mike Brest. Mike, we've been talking for a while about the tensions between the Biden administration and the Netanyahu government over how to conduct the war in Gaza, which the United States has been supporting with aid and financial support. These tensions have really seemed now to have boiled over into a bit of a shift in administration policy. Get us up to date on where things are.
So the whole shift in policy that we're still sort of figuring out as time goes on comes back to a series of strikes earlier this week that Israel has said has identified now as a mistake that targeted and killed 7 aid workers. Mm-hmm. And so these aid workers, which work for World Central Kitchen, which is the nonprofit international organization founded by Chef Jose Andres, mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
They were in a car labeled with their insignia. They had coordinated their travel with the IDF, and yet the 3-car convoy were hit with airstrikes. Everyone died who was in the cars. It was a tragic incident. We've heard almost immediately Israeli officials issue an apology and a recognition of what had happened, which is not common for Israeli military officials. And so these strikes were a big deal that have reverberated both in Israel as well as in Washington. And so as a result, we've seen stronger language than we have to date about President Biden and his administration's feelings about how Israel is carrying out this war. And so not only did we hear that the president was outraged at what happened, we've now heard administration officials criticize Israel's efforts throughout the entire war, saying they haven't done enough to protect aid workers as well as civilians in general. And we know that that has been a criticism that the U.S. has asked Israel to be better at over the course of the war. Now, what we've seen and what we've heard so far since this has happened has not resulted in a substantive policy shift yet. But we heard earlier today that President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke over the phone, and it was the first time they spoke since this aid convoy was hit, and that was the subject that they spoke about primarily. That was the reason for the call. And so one thing that President Biden said was that he needs to see Israel take concrete steps to do, as we mentioned, protect aid workers, protect civilians, and ensure more humanitarian aid can get into Gaza. And President Biden said that upon seeing those things come to fruition, could hinder or change U.S. policy towards Israel. And so this was the first time we've heard anything along the lines of a potential conditioning of U.S. aid and support to Israel. And so that's why this is, at this moment, somewhat of a seminal moment in the war, because it's the first time that we've even heard from the administration that there is a potential for a policy shift. And now there's no guarantee that this will change, President Biden's policy will change, and now it's on Israel to meet President Biden's demands.
But as you say, there have been 2 things really that the Biden administration has been really reluctant to do. And one is to impose, at least publicly, any conditions on U.S. aid. And 2 is to call for a ceasefire, even though a lot of Democrats in Congress would like to see that happen. Have we gotten closer, really, to that kind of a shift?
It looks like we've seen the administration get closer to the ceasefire part of your question. Mm-hmm. We've heard now, or as a result of the strike and the backlash that it's caused, we've heard the administration now say they believe a ceasefire should be done immediately. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not saying that they don't believe the hostages should be released. That's not saying that they believe Hamas should be able to retain power in Gaza. Mm-hmm. But President Biden effectively challenged Prime Minister Netanyahu to get a ceasefire deal in place, one that satisfies their needs and one that can satisfy the needs of the Palestinian people who need the surge of aid that could come with a ceasefire agreement.
Is the Netanyahu government still planning this Rafah offensive even against increasing U.S. opposition, I should say?
At this exact moment, nothing has changed from Israel's perspective. They still maintain that the only way for them to defeat the remaining Hamas battalions is if they carry out a ground invasion into Rafah. Now, we know that Rafah is one of the southernmost cities in Gaza. There are more than 1 million people, which is more than half of the Gaza population, that has fled to this city, Rafah. And so the U.S. And many other Western countries have issued grave warnings that there could be significant numbers of civilian casualties if Israel carries out these ground invasions, or this ground invasion in Rafah. And we've heard the president and his administration say Israel is able to accomplish their goal of defeating those battalions without going fully into Rafah, but they've not yet convinced Israel of that point. And so there are ongoing negotiations that have taken place over the last couple weeks that are expected to continue as the U.S. tries to convince Israel not to carry out full-scale operations in Rafah.
Thank you, Mike. You can read Mike and the rest of our national security team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.